Okay, let's move on. We have more stuff. Great speakers ahead. Our next presentation is the National Incident Management System Compliance in Nevada. And we'd like to welcome and call to the stage Jim Walker from the Nevada Department of Transportation and Mike Heidemann from Churchill County. Gentlemen.
I'm going to hide behind the podium so that he can use the mic. So if you have something to throw, he's an easier target. Well, good morning. I want to thank you for getting the opportunity to talk about NIMS compliance in Nevada. So my name is Jim Walker. I'm the emergency manager for the Nevada Department of Transportation. And I got into this project because I used to have the position that John Backadall has now as the preparedness manager for the Nevada Division of Emergency Management. And of course, I think you can understand that NIMS and NIMS compliance was very near and dear to my heart in that position, and it still is. Just because we move positions doesn't mean that things change in what we care about, what we want to do. And my current bosses are kind enough to let me to continue to work on this and continue to have a role in NIMS compliance within the state, even though I'm now in a different job position. So I really appreciate that. And so we wanted a chance to talk about this, and following up that last presentation, I don't know how this is going to go, so we'll see. You did such an excellent job, but we'll see how this one goes. And I know we're between you and the next break, so we'll try to make this as quick as we can here. So we want to talk about NIMS compliance, and the thing about this is about NIMS compliance, not necessarily about NIMS itself. And I know you were all, when you were reading that, probably thought, oh, another lecture on NIMS. Thank you very much. And a lot of you in here, I'm sure probably most of you in here know what NIMS is, the National Incident Management System is, know what it is comprised of and how all that works. But I didn't want to make the assumption that everybody here knew that. Everybody here was familiar with that, as familiar as some of us are with that. So there is, at the beginning of this, some basic what NIMS is and what we go through. So if you're sitting through this 14,000th time, I apologize for that, and please just bear with us. And when it comes to something that is a little bit more relevant, please try to wake up and we'll move on with that. So what is NIMS? NIMS was established, National Incident Management System was established by HSPD 5 back in 2003 to create a comprehensive national incident management system. Prior to that, they really didn't have any mandate that said everybody should be using the same system or a pretty similar system, so there were a lot of difficulties in communicating back and forth and being able to manage resources back and forth. So that's what NIMS is. I say it stands for the National Incident Management System, and it's now the national mandate on what we're supposed to be using as a framework to do incident response and emergency management. So why do we need NIMS? Well, the first thing I did when I started asking myself this question, remember this is why do we need NIMS, is of course I Googled it. And so, this is what came up. It's a consistent nationwide framework to basically get everybody working together across all disciplines and all sizes of disasters and everything that goes with that. I love the textbook answer because it is very complete and does what it is, but that's what it is, it's the textbook answer. That answer you get when you're in class and they say you got to take the test, so you learn the textbook answer, you copy it down, and you kind of wonder sometimes, what does that actually mean? It doesn't matter, I can copy down the answer, so I'm good, I know what it is. So to go beyond that a little bit on what NIMS was, I started asking people, why do we need NIMS? So I just went out and asked a few people. A few people within the state, because this is about NIMS compliance in Nevada. And the answer that I basically got was because NIMS compliance is a requirement for grant funding. And, well, it's a valid answer. It's very true. And you can't fault that. Money is important. Money is required. Without money, we don't do anything. We want to, no matter how much we want to. There's also some requirements for planning, training, and exercise in NIMS, and those kind of things. So, but that's not all NIMS is. A lot of people, when I've asked to them, I've talked to them, I ask people who aren't involved in the emergency management community about NIMS. I tell them, well, it's a National Incident Management System. They say, oh, it's ICS. No, it's not the same thing. ICS is a component of NIMS, but NIMS is much bigger than that. It's much broader than that. It includes ICS, it includes that operational command and control, but it also includes, say, planning, training, exercise, public information, community outreach, all those kind of things. So NIMS is a very huge program. It's a big wide brush that we're trying to spread with this thing. So, and then what is NIMS compliance? So, the big word we wanted to hear talk about on this, and this is where we're really getting into what this is about, is what is NIMS compliance. So what it started asking about, we wanted to be compliant with NIMS as a state. There are some reasons we need to be compliant, not only for the federal grant funding, we want to be eligible for that, but we have state statutes that say we need to be NIMS compliant. I know DEM has to provide reports to the Homeland Security Commission and others saying that we as a state are NIMS compliant and where we are in that, but what does that actually mean? And so, of course, the first thing we did as a group, we started asking FEMA, ask the feds, what is NIMS compliance? And so what FEMA basically told me is they don't really have a definition of what NIMS compliance is. They leave it to the jurisdiction to decide what it is for themselves. And I thought, oh, that's a nice squishy answer. That sounds wonderful. How is that going to help us? But then when I started thinking about it and really working on it, we realized that it actually is, it's a good answer. Because there's so many jurisdictions out there, there's so many states. Every state is different. I mean, if they put together a definition at the federal level that says this is NIMS compliance, you have to do these certain things, that may apply great to the state of Nevada. But what about California? What about Alabama or some of the East Coast states? It'd be very different there. So it'd be very, very difficult for the federal government to put together some kind of hard and fast rules for NIMS compliance that are going to apply to all of the states, all of the local jurisdictions. Remember, NIMS isn't just for states, though. It isn't just for the federal government. It's for the local jurisdictions. It's for NGOs. It's for all of those other businesses out there. It's for everybody. So putting together some hard and fast rules on this is NIMS compliance would be next to impossible at that level. So leaving it up to us as a state to decide what we wanted NIMS compliance to be is actually a good idea. It just requires us to do some work. And of course, being a typical state employee, kind of balked at that a little bit, but then decided it was a good place to go and let's actually do this. So there were no hard and fast, FEMA didn't come down and say, this is what it means, this is what we need to do. They said, decide for yourself what NIMS compliance means for you as a state, and then we'll work from there. So that's where we went. So the next question we asked after that, after what NIMS compliance is we asked, who should be NIMS compliant? So once again, when I asked people around who should be NIMS compliant, you know what the answer I got was? NIMS compliance is a federal requirement for grant funding, so those that have grant funding should be NIMS compliant. Once again, it's a good answer, it makes sense, but it doesn't really go far enough. Just because you get federal funding or you want federal funding, that's not really a good reason for NIMS compliance. NIMS compliance is important because going back to that original definition, it's the framework for being able to work cooperatively as organizations at all levels of government, in all areas, to be able to share resources, to work together, to have a similar command and control structure, to do what we need to do to effectively respond to emergencies and disasters. So it is a good answer. Funding is important, like I said, but it's not the only answer. So, getting into what is NIMS compliance for Nevada. As we started thinking about how we're going to determine what NIMS compliance really means for Nevada, now that FEMA was nice enough to let us do it on our own, then we started looking at how are we going to determine what this actually is. What do we mean by NIMS compliance for the state of Nevada? We've been talking about it for many years. I think as some of the emergencies managers out there know, we've talked about what NIMS compliance means. We've never really put together an answer as a state. We've never gone there. We've tried to come up with ways to do it, never worked. So what we decided to do is put together a working group to work on this problem and actually move it forward. So we developed a working group to try to define what NIMS compliance really means for the state of Nevada. To do that, of course, we had to define what NIMS was for the state of Nevada, what that really meant, and to move forward from there. So we put together a working group that consisted of course, state employees. We had DEM on the working group. We had other state agencies on the working group. I was there representing the State Department of Transportation. We had local jurisdictions on the working group. Heidemann was a part of that, tribal representation. We wanted to make sure that we didn't leave our tribal partners out, and federal representation as well. We had to make sure FEMA was on that group too, because of course they're the ones mandating this. We wanted to make sure we got their input and their buy-in in what we were doing. So we put together a working group, and we really started to look at what this meant for Nevada and where we could go with this. And we started with just a couple of basic questions. We realized very quickly as we were getting into this that what we were looking at was not a short-term, let's meet 2 times, figure out what NIMS compliance is, and say, yay, great, we did it, and walk away. This is going to be an ongoing, long-term thing. The working group we put together is going to have to be working really for years to get this right and to really do it well, but that's okay. We needed a starting point. So that's where we're at with this, is the starting point. So the working group's first year goals, what we first started to look at, really is what are the most important components of NIMS for the state of Nevada. So as we're talking about all of these different jurisdictions, like I mentioned before, the difficulty with FEMA coming up with a description of NIMS was how does it work for all of the different jurisdictions they have to deal with, all of the states, territories, everything they have to deal with. Well, we have the same issue looking at it as a state from a little bit smaller perspective. What is important to us as a state for NIMS compliance? What components of NIMS do we really need to be worried about? Do we really need to take a look at? So that was the first place we wanted to start. And from there, we wanted to look at how are we going to gather information on those components? Once we determined what they were, how are we going to find out where we're at in the state with that? Because we're talking compliance here, so are we actually doing what we're supposed to be doing in those areas or not? So those were the 2 big questions we really wanted to address. They're pretty big questions for a start, but that's where we wanted to go. And the goal is, and we'll talk about looking forward a little bit more at the end of this, is this will be fleshed out more as years go by and we're working forward, but this is the starting point. So our first year goals were basically those 2, and that's where we decided to start. So what we wanted to do, what we ended up with doing is we decided that we were going to look at about 10 components of NIMS that we felt were the most important for the state, for all of the jurisdictions that were in the state. We wanted to start with, we just picked the number we thought was reasonable, which was around 10, and start looking at how we could get information on those 10 or about 10 items and what we wanted to work on. So we, working as a group, like I said, we got together, we made some proposals, went back and forth a little bit, and all of those involved, the tribal organizations, the state agencies, the local jurisdictions, got input from all of them on what did they think were the most important ones. And these are what we're going to go through here real quick, is what we came up with. So what we decided to do is we come up with some required components. These are what we feel as a state are required components that we need to have to be compliant with NIMS. And then at the end, we have a couple of them that are optional, but highly recommended. So we'll go through these real quick. So the first one that we came up with for the required components was to formally adopt NIMS as a system. And however that works for your organization is how we wanted to look at that. As in state, we have it adopted as a statute. I know that some counties have it in their codes. Whether it's a regulation, tribal resolution, however it works for your organization to actually formally adopt NIMS as your framework for emergency management. So we wanted to ask these questions. So the next thing was, do you have a planning program? Like I say, NIMS is a lot more than just an incident command system, so we wanted to look at some of the different components. We felt the planning was very important. I know as we're talking about in the last presentation, that planning portion of it is extremely important, that planning portion of emergency response. So we wanted to put some emphasis on that as well. So do you have a planning portion to it? Do you have a formal planning program as part of your organization? And we put in a couple of examples of what kind of plans that we felt, and of course we know those don't apply to everybody. Not everybody is going to have, say, a hazard mitigation plan or they should have a continuity of operations plan. Maybe not a continuity of government plan, depending on what kind of organization they are. But we wanted to put some examples in there of what we felt were some good minimums for those organizations, what they were looking for, or what we thought would be good for NIMS compliance. So identify personnel. So when we talked about identifying key personnel, when I first brought this up, we first started talking about this in our working group. We asked, okay, so let's ask the question of those, who has identified personnel for NIMS? And the first answer I actually heard was, everybody's got that already, it's not a big deal. And I was just going to say, yes, we have it, and say, let's not do it. Well, but the reason for putting this in there is not just because we want to say, do you have an emergency manager? Do you know who your emergency manager is? An emergency manager, yes, is a required person. It's required personnel, but it goes a lot more than that. Do you have your positions identified in your emergency operations plan? Not only having those positions identified, but do you know who's going to fill those positions? Do you know that they're qualified for that position? They've had the training they need for that position. Do they know that they're in that position? And this is a big one that comes up a lot. I know in my organization, in NDOT, we get a lot of turnover in personnel. And I have positions in our emergency operations plan, say, great, you're going to be the planning chief. And I'll go and talk to them and say, so what training have you had for being the planning chief? And they're like, what? They have no idea even that they're in our emergency operations plan. Some of them don't even know we have an emergency operations plan. But they're identified in that plan as fulfilling that position. So, when we talked about identified personnel, there's more depth to that than just saying, do you have an emergency manager? Do you have your positions identified? Have you thought about what positions you're going to need as you're going through some kind of an incident? Like I said, the planning chiefs, the operations chief, how far down do you want to go? Have you identified those people? Do you know who they are? Do they know they're identified? So, implement a training program. I think most of us have training programs. We understand the importance of training programs. So we wanted to make sure that participate in the state TPW, the training and exercise planning workshop. I don't know, is everybody aware that they do this training and exercise planning workshop? The state does that every year. How many people here have actually participated in that? A few. Okay. Well, it's not just the state that does training and exercise planning workshops. I know a couple of counties do their own as well. But what the training and exercise planning workshop is when they get together, the different jurisdictions, to talk about what their plans are for training over the next up to 3 years. And that way you can see not only what you're doing, what you have planned in the training, but also what other jurisdictions have planned as well, so that you can help to coordinate this training, you can consolidate training if possible, you can leverage your training, your funding, if you can send people to other people's training as well, just get the most out of what you can do for those. So it's part of that coordination portion of NIMS that's so important, training and exercise planning workshops. But also we put on submitting an annual report. If nobody knows what training you're doing, if we don't have an idea of what training you're doing at the state level, it's going to be really hard for us to certify as a state that we're NIMS compliant and to keep that federal funding coming in and make sure we're eligible for it. So, exercise program, basically the same thing. Do you have an active exercise program that's been implemented? Are you doing exercises that you need to be doing, that you should be doing? Are you participating in the training and exercise planning workshops? Are you coordinating those exercises with other jurisdictions, other agencies? Does the state know? Do others know what you're doing? Also put in there the HC program, the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program. And I think for those that have been through that class, we talk about all of the components of that, how to plan an exercise, how to conduct an exercise, how to do the after-action reports, and everything that goes with that. It's an important part of that, so you make sure you're not missing some of those important parts of doing an exercise. Coordination of training and exercise, we leave that as its own bullet, even though it's really included in some of the others as well. By participating in the training and exercise planning workshop, there's more to it than just that one workshop. You're coordinating your training and exercise with other jurisdictions, making sure that you're sharing and know what's going on. There is a limited amount of funding out there. There's a limited amount of time. The more we can share training, the more we can share our exercises, we can get everybody involved in it, we can keep it going, the better off we're all going to be. And interoperable communications. We don't know how important interoperable communications are. Do you have somebody that's been designated to be the point person for your interoperable communications? It seems like kind of a basic concept, but not everybody does. In a lot of jurisdictions, or in some jurisdictions, they're thinking, okay, we need to have interoperable communications, then there's a radio shop over there, they'll take care of it. You need to have somebody that's identified as the point person on that, somebody who's responsible for it. I think we've probably all learned that lesson, but if you don't have somebody that's responsible for something, it's not going to happen. Okay, do you use the NIMS systems and processes? So there are processes out there, and there's a system out there that is kind of NIMS driven. Now I know that none of us want to be locked into a system that we don't understand and we're not going to use. I think we fully understand that. FEMA understands that as well. DHS knows that. So the NIMS program, even though this is asking if we use the NIMS processes and the NIMS programs, it's not locking you into a system where it's not going to work for you. NIMS was deliberately designed to be flexible enough that you can develop a system, you can use your own system that works for you, and it will still fall under NIMS, will still be NIMS compliant. So by asking this question, and by looking at this particular part of it, we weren't asking of, do you do things the same way that the state does it, or do you do it the same way that Washoe County or Clark County or whatever county does it. We're asking just, do you have a system that works for you to be able to respond and manage emergencies. So, do you have an identified, multi-area coordination center or emergency operations center? Basic yes or no. Do you have something you can use for that? Do you have a system for being able to? Hard to see that. But so basically, do you have an AR system? Do you have an after-action report system? Do you have a way of being able to analyze what happened during an emergency, during an exercise, being able to document what happened, being able to develop an improvement plan based off of that, a way to move forward so you're constantly improving your system and not just making the same mistakes over and over again. Typing and inventorying. Do you type and inventory your assets, both equipment and people? And I know looking at typing and inventorying, we're not really asking about, do they have to have a FEMA type or something like that. It's just, do you have a system for typing and inventorying your assets? There's no mandate in this anywhere, or actually anywhere within the state, within any of the statutes or anything like that, that says that you have to share resources with somebody else. So by typing and inventorying your resources, it just helps you and helps everybody to understand what you have available and where you're at. But it doesn't mandate you to do anything necessarily with them, other than to understand what you have, so that people may be able to come reach out and ask, do you have something that can help us? Or they may know you have something that can help and say, is it available? But there's no mandate that says that you have to share resources or anything like that. And for political jurisdictions, having an active LEPC, a local area planning commission. And I think the key to this was an active LEPC. Are they actually meeting? Is your local area planning commission doing what they're supposed to be doing? Are they following through on their mandates and what they need to do to be able to have their community meetings, to do the planning that they're supposed to be doing for your community, being involved in the community, getting the community involved in your emergency programs. So is anybody actually counting those and how many that we did? Nobody? Good. Well, there was actually 12 there. So our goal was 10. We actually came up with, at the end, we ended up with 12 different items that we wanted on this list. We ended up with on this list. So, well, then we'll go into the highly recommended components. So we've got 2 of those that were highly recommended. So develop and maintain mutual aid agreements. It's a great idea to have mutual aid agreements. Despite the fact that NIMS is designed to be able to effectively coordinate resources back and forth between different organizations at different levels, different jurisdictions and all that stuff, getting mutual aid agreements in place is a great thing. It allows you to resolve issues with that sharing of resources before they happen, to be able to work out problems, to be able to know what you're going to get. If you're just relying on the fact that, well, I looked at a list and they have certain resources, so when I need it, they're going to give it to you, it doesn't always work that way. Having a mutual aid agreement is necessary if you want to make sure that those resources are going to be available and you know what's involved in doing that. Whether there's going to be costs involved, who's going to be paying for it, who's going to be responsible for it, insurance issues, liability issues, all of those kind of stuff that can be worked out in advance. And that way you can be really prepared for what you need to be prepared for. And the last one, which actually kind of sounds a little bit self-serving being up here today doing this presentation, is to attend the Preparedness Summit annually.
Yeah.
Hey, somebody's awake. So the reason we put that one on there is because being able to know who's out there, knowing your partners out there is extremely important. And networking opportunities like this don't happen a lot. So preparing the summit, being able to come to this summit, preparing for the summit, being able to come here, meet others who are in the same business you are, others who don't traditionally get to meet. There's a lot of organizations out here that we traditionally don't meet with. Maybe somebody you haven't thought about, you haven't had the opportunity to get together with. But having these networking opportunities are golden, and you should definitely take advantage of that. And NEPA has done an outstanding job of putting this together. It gets bigger every year, more involvement every year. And the vendors that they're bringing in, being able to provide resources, learning who to talk to, you can't pass that up. So highly, highly recommended to be able to attend this summit every year and make those contacts and do what you need to do there. So, okay, so overall, say there were 12 required and 2 optional that we came up with. So after we determined what we really wanted for the state of Nevada, like I said, based on the input we got from state, local, tribal jurisdictions, then we came down to, okay, now we know what we're looking for, so that's a good starting point. How are we going to get that information from the local jurisdictions? Being the first year, having a very short time frame to be able to get this done and get it out, we decided as a working group that we were going to do an online survey. So we put together an online survey based off of these 10 questions. And we just deliberately wrote the questions when we put the survey together as closed type questions. They were not these open-ended, give us a 40,000 word essay on each of these sections and try to fill it out. We knew we would probably get maybe half of a response if we did that. So we made closed type questions. Yes or no, check the box, are you doing this or not? We deliberately did that. And some of them we did give space, you could fill in additional information if you wanted to, but most of them we didn't. So, and then we sent that out on the survey to about 630 different people on the listserv. And we got 28 responses. Wow. Yeah, it's 4.6% in case any of you are math geeks out there. I know we want to figure that out. So, you know, to tell you the truth, it wasn't hugely surprising because every year there's a lot of stuff that goes out asking people the same questions, the same stuff from a lot of different organizations. From the DEM perspective, with them doing what they need to do for NIMS, for the THIRA, for the Threat and Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment, they're sending out there trying to do their information every year. Health is doing their own assessments, they're trying to get the information every year. Everybody's doing all of this to try to get information every year. A lot of it seems very, very redundant. People get very tired of trying to answer the same questions over and over again. It's not really surprising. So we weren't hugely surprised, but on the other hand, I think we can do better than that. And that's one of the reasons I'm glad we get an opportunity to come up here and talk to you this year and say, hey, this is where we're at. So next year, when we start asking these questions, please, can you help us beat 4.6%? Because I'm sure that probably most of you are on that list, or on DEM's listserv, and you get their emails all the time that they come out. If you're not, please talk to DEM and get on their listserv. A lot of great information comes out all the time about what's going on and where the emergency management community is and things that are happening. So training opportunities, exercise opportunities, all of that kind of stuff. If you want to get their situation reports when incidents actually happen, get on the listserv. So sign up for it. Shameless plug for an agency I don't work for anymore. So, but that's what we got. So we got those 28 responses, and that's what we used really to determine where we are for NIMS compliance for this year. Now, I do understand the fact. I understand 630 subscribers. Not all of those are state subscribers. Some of them are out of state. Some of them are just those that are interested in what's going on in Nevada. Some of them are politicians. There are people from all over the place. We don't expect, when we set it out to 630 people, to get 630 responses. We think that would be a little bit unreasonable. But when you even just looking at the jurisdictions within the state, the number of counties we have, the number of tribes we have, the state agencies that are out there, probably can do a little bit better than 28 people responding. And some of those were from the same jurisdictions. So the survey results, and I'm not going to go through what all the results were for all those questions. I don't think you want to sit here and listen to numbers all day long. If you want to know what they were, feel free to get with me sometime. I'll be happy to send you the results. I think it's about 50 pages long. Survey results for you is, of course, for reporting. It's a requirement for the state of Nevada to certify to the federal government every year by December 31st that we are NIMS compliant. And that's really one of the driving factors on this whole project, is the fact that how can we say as a state we're NIMS compliant if we don't have something hard and fast to back that up? We want to make sure that when we tell the federal government we're NIMS compliant, that if they ever come in and say, oh yeah, how can you say that we have an answer for them. So we can use this at the start of that, so we can really start getting some good valid numbers, some good valid information on proving our NIMS compliance as a state. So verifying compliance. One of the big things, though, that we're looking at with this, as we're moving forward through this, is to help determine where the funding should be spent. Like I said, being NIMS compliant allows us to bring that federal funding into the state. Where's that money going to go? What are we going to use that for? As we're looking at those numbers for NIMS compliance, we're looking at how many organizations actually do have a good training program, how many have an exercise program. Where are we lacking in that? If we have these programs, these points that we've determined are the important ones for our state, and we're finding out through doing these surveys or we're reaching out and gathering this information that we have shortages in certain areas, that's a pretty good indication of maybe where we want to be spending our money. We want to be using this federal funding that's coming in, the limited funding that's available to build up these areas where we're having shortages in our state. So the way forward is we want to continue with the working group. Like I said, it's not a one-year thing. As we're moving forward, we want to better define, get it tighter, get it better. As we get more input from throughout the state, from different organizations, more want to get involved. As we were working through this process, we kept having people come to us and say, yeah, I want to be in that working group, and that's great. We want to get more input. We want to get more people involved in working on what NIMS is, what NIMS compliance is for the state of Nevada. We want to be careful as well not to get so many people on it that it just becomes too huge to use, but we do want to get as much input as we can. We want to continue to revise the essential NIMS components, make sure that's relevant to our state. It may change every now and then, that's fine. So we keep doing that. And so we want to work to consolidate this information gathering. For a lot of years we've been talking about doing that. How are we going to consolidate all of the different surveys that are out there from all of the different organizations trying to gather the same information on where we're at for preparedness, where we're at for these NIMS components. We've never really had a body that has been right for being able to pull all of that together, and we're hoping this working group can fulfill that role. We can start reaching out to health, we can reach out with what FEMA needs, we can reach out to all the different organizations, pull that together, combine it together, and take some of the time burden off of the local jurisdictions, the tribal jurisdictions, to provide that information back to a larger emergency management community, so that can be used for reporting for all of the different things that need to be done with all those organizations. So from there, let's say, are there any questions about what we're doing and why? Boy, it must be real
I have a question.
Right.
So we're determining what NIMS looks like within Nevada. Any ideas on how we will implement what NIMS looks like in Nevada? Because like for the funding, everyone has to do it, but like to get all the many stakeholders to actually comply, so to say. How does that look?
So I kind of heard two parts to that question. The first part was, as we're determining what NIMS really means for Nevada, how are we going to try to encourage stakeholders to comply with that? Is that okay? Well, I think that understanding what NIMS is for Nevada actually should help the jurisdictions in the first place, because if if we really narrowed it down, NIMS is so large, it's very difficult for a lot of people, a lot of organizations, jurisdictions to kind of get their head around what it really means to be a part of NIMS and to be NIMS compliant. So by narrowing it down for us as a state, it helps us to understand that. It makes it easier for us to focus a little bit on what we're trying to do in our programs and in our organizations. So as we're moving forward through this, if we can take the information we're getting from these surveys and we take that up to the organization like the DEMs when they're doing the preparedness committee and other organizations that are managing the funding and making recommendations on where funding is going to be spent, on what we need to do, what we need to focus on as a state. As say Justin's putting together the strategic plan for the Division of Emergency Management, where we want to go as a state over the next 5 years, take this information into consideration when doing that. It's going to help to refine where we're going as a state and help us to focus where we're putting our efforts. And that's really what it comes down to. I think even more than the money part, it's the effort part. We have very limited resources to be able to apply effort to where we want to go. So I hope this can help us to refine that and focus it better. So, does that answer your question? Any other questions before I turn it over to Mike? Okay, thank you.
Presentation.
What do you need?
My presentation.
Just click forward.
They have it over there. There you go.
All right. Good morning. I guess my job here today was to balance the stage for Jim and get us caught up for break. So this was born out of a conversation with Melissa Southard at another meeting, who we talked about maybe we should bring ICS to the forefront as part of NIMS. And she said, "Oh, good idea." And then you called Matt, Mr. NEPA, about 6 weeks later, said, "All right, Mike, present something on ICS." And I thought, how are we going to do this without making it an ICS class? So we're going to blow through this fairly quickly. And Paul, I do want you to know that your live streaming is working, because while I was standing here, I had several texts from up north saying, "Stand up straight." That was good. So what is it? How do we get a buy-in from our peers? Because one of the things that some of us are good at is ICS, but everybody is not. And excuse me in advance for some of my slides, because I'm a fire guy. Even though I'm the emergency manager for Churchill County now, my history is fire, and a lot of this is fire related. So what don't we like? Everybody complains all the time about the way things are, but nobody wants you to change it, right? So we're going to have to think about how we get people to buy in to this thing we call ICS and the importance of it. We talked about it, grant seasons and funding, but really it's safety. We have our pool pack people over there who were involved in a couple incidents in rural Nevada where they've had payouts. OSHA has fined some entities here in our state for not using the incident command system. So something we need to get them going in on. So what is it? Without being you guys can all read, but I want you to know the difference between an incident and an event. So we all use ICS typically on all of the incidents we are on, but events use ICS also. I suspect that this conference here was based on an ICS system where somebody's in charge, and then we have somebody in charge of speakers and somebody in charge of facilities, so on and so forth. So think about the fact that all of us use ICS pretty much on a daily basis, but we just don't call it that. So, simple ICS organization with an incident commander, we all know that on a small incident, you are the incident commander, and as it builds, you're all of these positions until you farm them out to the proper people. Span of control, again, some of the new things with ICS says that span of control has gone from the 5 to 7 number, or 3 to 7, with 5 being optimal, to whatever you feel comfortable with, which I have a problem with, because some people handling 100 people and it just doesn't work that way. So, excuse me for some of the slides, but you should use span of control. So who uses it? Who really uses it, and who should? So, obviously something during the electronic transformation got sideways here, but we'll go with it. So this is something I did once before, had to do with a football team. And obviously they're going to use ICS. So they have their general manager, he's basically their commander, and then HR department, and then they get down where they have the head coach, and he breaks it down. They have a logistics section, they do their planning section, they have their admin section, and again, looking for the planning section, one of the things they do, they're planning for future draft picks. The head coach, he's looking at offensive, defensive coordinators, right on down the line to all these positions that they have, from line coaches and so on and so forth. So as you can see, that's something that you would use. Logistics section, he's setting up travel, meals, you know, so on and so forth. So a little idea of ICS. So I did this once before, a little bit more in depth, and I had a guy in the audience say, well, I can tell you about ICS, I have 5 kids. So we use Unified Command at home. She's logistics and planning, and I'm finance and operations. And I said, you win, you can do the rest of the presentation. I thought that was a great segue into why we all really use ICS. So the big thing with ICS, common terminology. Some of us that have been around a long time have really bad habits and try to get them broken with using 10 codes and so on and so forth. When one of the areas that I'm involved in, we've got a few guys that, you know, where they're 10-4, 10-8, 10-7, 6, 10-7. Can't you just say you're back at the firehouse? We all understand that. And that's what NIMS and ICS is all about, common terminology. Consistent structure, the titles are all the same. It doesn't matter who's in them. The titles are what we want to concentrate on. Communication, Jim talked on that quite a bit. And common incident facilities. So, where are we going to get some of this training? There's a lot of places out there. Homeland Security, FEMA has the independent study programs. They will do direct delivery, and you can go back to the academy back in Emmitsburg. The other piece of it is DEM. They have a lot of training that is available online at their facility, and also direct delivery through the Department of Emergency Management here in Nevada. So reach out to them. They want to get out and train. So some of the training resources, as you can see, maybe, are the website for FEMA with the 100, 700, 800 type classes, and all of the things through DEM. I don't know how that changed color during the transfer, but so anyway, there's a lot of training resources out there through DEM, and this is a sample of one of the calendars that DEM has in place. Of what they have going on. There's some 300 trainings going on at different dates. But one of the things that we need to do is practice this. So we get our certificate, we take the class, and then we go home and forget about it. So one of the things that I instituted that got me in some trouble at first was using the ICS system on every small event. In my fire department out on the Army base, we set up ICS for every EMS call, every response that we do. And the underlying reason for that is because if we don't use them on the small incidents, we won't be very good at them when we really need them on the large incidents. So it's nice to have the piece of paper, but the takeaway here is practice it, use it. I did some work with a rural hospital and was very, very impressed with the HICS system that they had in place. They do a very good job of it, as I'm sure some of the other entities do. So, consequences. Freelancing. ICS eliminates freelancing. Why is that important? Well, there's a thing called the Public Safety Officer Benefit Program, and even though it's a morbid subject, if one of us goes down in the line of duty, there's a federal fund that is up to $385,000 right now that our family members would be entitled to. I've seen several cases dismissed from the Department of Justice because of freelancing on scene when they do their investigations. Not only is it a death benefit, it has now been changed in the last couple of years to a disability benefit and also a college education where they have a monthly stipend to children of somebody that's fallen in the line of duty of $1,248 a month to help them with their college expenses. So it's really important that we follow these for other reasons than just be good practice and safe for our people. OSHA. Again, I mentioned some of the OSHA fines that have happened here in this state, and a couple of them have been during the investigation for not following the incident command system. So, unified command, that's pretty self-explanatory. That's something that was very successful out in Churchill County during the 2017 floods. We set up unified command. Everybody got a quick lesson on, ICS 214 forms, so on and so forth, and it allowed us to recuperate a lot of funds from FEMA. So very important that we understand our players. Again, the EOC, we've got to have one. It's a pre-designed facility. But the biggest thing with the EOC, as we go back in our own jurisdictions, is to really build those relationships with our elected officials. Is not the incident command post. We need to keep them away from us when we're running a scene. So I'll end with this, because I know John wants you guys to fill your feedback forms out at the end of this conference, and any questions that you might have for Jim. So that should get us close to breakdown.
Thank you, John. So we're going to take another networking break. Meet back here at 11:30. We'll do 11:30. Give us a few minutes to get out, stretch your legs. Yeah, 11:30. Back